I never thought Thanksgiving would be the night my entire family turned against me. One moment I was placing the pumpkin pie on the table, and the next my own mother stood up and announced that I was a failure for choosing trade school instead of college. The laughter that followed still rings in my ears, my father pointing to the door, my brother recording everything for TikTok. Millions watched me being humiliated online. But here's the part no one knew. The house they lived in, the mortgage they bragged about paying off, was carried entirely by me. I grew up believing one simple truth: family was everything. My parents made sure of that. From the time I could walk, I was told to put my family first, no matter what. It wasn't just a value, it was a rule written into my skin. If my father needed me to cover his medical bills, I did it without question. If my mother wanted help paying for groceries or utilities, I would open my checkbook before she even finished her request. I thought it was love, devotion, loyalty, but it was really training, conditioning me to give until nothing was left. When I finished high school, I didn't go to college right away. My parents said it was fine as long as I worked and sent money home. I got a decent job, later chose trade school to secure a skill that could actually pay my bills and theirs. And soon I became the one holding up the walls of the family home. Every month I transferred money for the mortgage, justifying it to myself. They raised me, I owe them this. One night, after I sent another payment, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My mother whispered, "This house will always be ours." My father nodded, adding, "She thinks she's helping, but really, she's just doing her duty." I froze in the hallway. My chest ached, but I convinced myself I had misheard. Surely they were just nervous about money. Surely I was part of us, not just their tool. Still, those words echoed in my head, reminding me of something I wasn't ready to face. Maybe my love was one-sided. I buried that suspicion. I wanted to believe in them, to believe that I was more than an ATM. Even when the late-night phone calls came, I picked up every time. My mother would sob about bills. My father would complain about being underappreciated at work. And I would send money, reassure them, tell myself this was what a good daughter did. Then one day I accidentally found a group chat on my mother's phone while helping her fix her Wi-Fi. It was titled Family Only. Inside, my parents and my brother were laughing about me. My brother wrote, "ATM strikes again, mortgage covered." My mother replied with a laughing emoji, and my father added, "As long as she's paying, we're winning." I couldn't breathe. My eyes blurred with tears, my throat tightened. I dropped the phone back on the couch, pretending I hadn't seen anything. My mother asked if the Wi-Fi was working again, and I nodded quickly, retreating to my car. Alone, I sat behind the wheel, shaking. I wanted to scream, to confront them, but instead I whispered to myself, "At least they still need me. At least I have a role here." It was pathetic, but in that moment, it was the only way I could stop my heart from shattering. That night, I went home to my apartment and collapsed on the floor, pulling my dog into my arms. His fur was warm, his breathing steady. I buried my face into him, muttering, "At least you won't betray me." The room was silent except for the sound of his tail thumping softly against the hardwood. That silence was more comforting than anything my family had given me in years. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that families fought, families teased, that maybe they didn't mean it the way it sounded. I forced myself to believe I was exaggerating, being oversensitive, and I clung to that denial because the alternative, that my own family only saw me as a wallet, was too devastating to accept. Weeks passed, and I continued to pour money into that mortgage, into their lives. Every transfer was a knife I handed them willingly, hoping they would never use it against me. But deep inside, something was shifting. My blind loyalty was starting to crumble. The whispers in the kitchen, the group chat, the smirks when I mentioned trade school, they were seeds of doubt I could no longer bury. I told myself to hold on, to wait for Thanksgiving, the one holiday that always reminded me of better times. I imagined laughter, food, warmth, the family I used to believe in. I told myself this year would be different, that maybe they'd see me, appreciate me, finally acknowledge my sacrifices. But I was wrong, because what waited for me at that Thanksgiving table wasn't gratitude, it wasn't love, it was betrayal so sharp it would slice through every illusion I had left. Thanksgiving was supposed to be my safe place. Every year I clung to the hope that around that table, surrounded by food and family, I might finally feel like I belonged. I baked my pumpkin pie from scratch that morning, determined to contribute something sweet, something that showed I cared. I told myself this year would be different. But as I walked into the dining room, balancing the pie in my hands, my mother rose from her chair with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She tapped her fork against her glass to silence the room and then said, "We are so proud of our family. My son about to finish his degree. My husband still the head of this household." And then she glanced at me, her lip curling. My daughter, who wasted her life on trade school. The table erupted in laughter. My uncle slapped the table, wheezing. My aunt covered her mouth as if shocked, but then let out a giggle. My father leaned back, smirking, adding, "She thinks fixing pipes is the same as a career. What a disappointment." My face burned as I tried to set the pie down. The room blurred. Then I heard my brother's voice, gleeful, cruel. "Everyone, say hi to our little loser." He held up his phone, the camera pointed straight at me, live streaming to his followers on TikTok. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. I turned toward my parents, hoping one of them would stop this, but my father only said, "Put that pie back in the kitchen, Amanda. We don't need a failure ruining our appetite." I left the room in silence, my legs numb, my chest hollow. But I could still hear the laughter echoing, chasing me down the hall. Amanda thought she had hit rock bottom that night, but she had no idea the humiliation would stretch far beyond that table. What she didn't know was that millions would soon be laughing with them. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications stacked on top of each other. My brother's live stream had gone viral. Millions of views. Comments poured in. "Who chooses trade school? LMAO." She looks so pathetic. Imagine being the family failure. By the time I walked into work, even my coworkers were whispering. At lunch, one of them came straight up to me and asked, "Is that you in the video?" My throat tightened. I wanted to deny it, but the truth was already written on their faces. Shame weighed down on me, heavier than any debt I had ever carried. I left work early, unable to endure the stares. Sitting in my car in the parking lot, I scrolled through the video again. My mother's words, my father's smirk, my brother's triumphant laugh, all replayed endlessly on the screen, preserved forever for strangers to mock. First came the shock, then the shame sinking into my skin like ink. Finally, anger. White-hot anger that I had swallowed for years but could no longer contain. I drove to my apartment, determined to look through my files. If they saw me as worthless, I needed to remind myself of what I had actually given them. I pulled out the mortgage records I'd kept over the years, receipts, bank statements. Line after line, my name was there, my payments keeping that roof above their heads. But then I saw it. The mortgage wasn't under my name at all. I wasn't listed as an owner, not even a partial one. My father's name, my mother's name, no mention of me. I flipped through the paperwork, desperate to find even a trace. I found one letter, dated months earlier, confirming that they had refinanced the house without me. The realization crashed over me. I had paid nearly 70% of that mortgage, and they had locked me out completely. My money had secured their home, their comfort, while they erased me from the very foundation I had built. I dropped the papers, my hands shaking. Tears blurred the words until they became nothing but black streaks. I stumbled outside, sat in my car, and let the sobs take me. My chest heaved, my eyes stung, and the steering wheel dug into my forehead as I leaned against it. In the middle of my breakdown, one thought pierced through the chaos. If they've already erased me from the house, what do I have left to lose? It was the first time in my life that question had crossed my mind, and it would change everything. The night after discovering the truth about the mortgage, I barely slept. My head pounded, my chest felt like a vice, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's smirk and my mother's whisper, "This house will always be ours." For the first time in years, I didn't just feel used, I felt erased. But I also knew one thing: if they could erase me, I could erase their illusion. I started gathering everything. First came the bank statements, years of transfers, line after line, each one stamped with my account number. Every dollar I had sacrificed stared back at me. Then came the voice notes. My phone was full of them, late-night calls from my mother, sobbing about bills, my father demanding I cover another overdue payment. "You know we can't do this without you," my mother's voice cracked in one recording. I replayed it again and again, the irony twisting my stomach, and then the group chat screenshots. My brother's gleeful text calling me the walking ATM. My father replying, "As long as she's paying, we're winning." My mother's laughing emojis. Proof, undeniable proof, of what I had tried to deny for too long. But the worst piece of evidence came by accident. While digging through my father's old email account, I still had access from the time I helped set up his phone. I found a message addressed to their lawyer. It was short, almost casual, but it shattered me more than any cruel word they had spoken. "When she stops being useful, we'll cut her off completely. This house belongs to us. Once she has no value, we send her away." My stomach turned. I dropped the phone onto the bed and stared at the ceiling. For years, I had convinced myself their cruelty was careless, unintentional, maybe just stress. But this wasn't careless. This was deliberate. They had planned it all along. Amanda understood then. This wasn't about money. It had never been just about money. This was a plan, carefully crafted, to use me until I was dry and then discard me. And that was the night my loyalty snapped. Still, I knew rage wasn't enough. I couldn't storm into their house screaming, couldn't demand an apology they'd never mean. They had spent years manipulating me. I needed more than emotion to fight them. I needed strategy. The next morning, I made my first call to a lawyer. Sitting in her office, I laid out the bank statements, the recordings, the screenshots, my voice shaking as I explained how I had paid nearly 70% of a mortgage I didn't even own. She leaned back, brows furrowed, then said, "Legally, this is tricky, but morally, you have them nailed. Keep collecting, don't let them know what you have." Her words were both a warning and a weapon. Next, I reached out to my aunt, the only relative who had ever treated me like more than a means to an end. When I told her what I had found, she went pale. "Amanda, I need to tell you something." She hesitated, then admitted she had overheard my parents talking months earlier about rewriting their will. They had removed my name completely. Everything, the house, the savings, even my grandmother's jewelry, would go to my brother. "They said you didn't deserve anything since you chose the wrong path." The words sank in like ice. My own parents had erased me, not just from their present, but from their future. Finally, I called my best friend, a public relations specialist who had seen the viral TikTok clip. She didn't mince words. "Amanda, that video is turning into a meme, and people are cutting your face into reaction clips. It's getting worse." Hearing that should have destroyed me, but instead it lit a fire. If my humiliation could spread, so could the truth. One evening, I sat with them, lawyer, aunt, best friend, in a small coffee shop downtown. My evidence spread across the table, their faces tense as they read through it all. My lawyer underlined key phrases, my aunt shook her head in disbelief, and my best friend whispered, "This isn't just a family problem anymore. This is a story." Her words haunted me. A story, yes. For years, my parents had controlled the narrative. Amanda the failure, Amanda the ATM, Amanda the disappointment. But stories could be rewritten. That night, after they left, I stayed behind in the coffee shop. The lights were dim, the street outside quiet. I wrapped my hands around my mug, staring into the steam, and remembered being a little girl sitting in that same house I was paying for, shivering in the cold because the heat had been shut off. I remembered clutching my blanket and whispering to myself, "One day I'll make sure we never lose this house again." Tears welled in my eyes. My entire life, I had been fighting to save a home that was never mine. But now I saw it differently. The house was never meant to be my prison. It was my weapon. I dried my tears, pulled out my notebook, and began sketching out a plan. Not just to stop paying the mortgage, not just to walk away, but to time everything, to let the truth unravel in the most public, undeniable way possible. The evidence was my sword, my allies were my shield, and the house I had once saved would soon be the place they lost everything. Christmas arrived wrapped in glittering lights and hollow cheer. My parents had outdone themselves decorating the house I had paid for, stringing lights across the roof, and posting photos online with captions like, "Family is everything." I almost laughed at the irony. For weeks, they had been boasting about the perfect holiday gathering, inviting every relative, every neighbor. They even announced that the whole thing would be live-streamed on Facebook, so friends near and far could witness our family's bond. I drove there with steady hands and a calm smile, but inside, my heart pounded with anticipation. In my purse sat a flash drive of evidence, though I didn't need it anymore. The real hammer was already on its way. The foreclosure notice, scheduled to be hand-delivered by the bank. Timing was everything. I entered the house to the sound of carols and chatter. Relatives hugged each other, posed for photos, clinked glasses. My mother wore her finest dress, my father shook hands proudly, and my brother paced with his phone, making sure the livestream angle was just right. "Smile," he told me coldly as I walked in. "You don't want to look like a loser again." I smiled back, but not for him. I smiled because I knew what was coming. Dinner began with toasts. My uncle raised his glass, declaring, "To a family that sticks together through everything." Laughter, applause, the clinking of glasses. My father nodded, soaking in the praise. My mother reached over to pat my brother's hand. Not once did they acknowledge me. I was invisible at the very table I had built. But invisibility had its advantage. While they laughed and performed for the camera, I sat quietly, sipping wine, waiting. The seconds ticked by, the air heavy with the scent of roasted turkey. And then a knock at the door. My father rose annoyed. "Who's knocking on Christmas?" he muttered, striding toward the entryway. He opened the door and froze. Standing there was a man in a dark coat, a folder in his hand. "Are you Mr. Collins?" the man asked formally. My father stammered, "Yes." The man handed him an envelope, marked in bold red letters, "Foreclosure Notice." Gasps rippled through the room. My father's face drained of color as he fumbled with the papers. This must be a mistake," he sputtered. My mother rushed over, reading the letter over his shoulder, her mouth dropping open. The relatives stared, murmuring. Someone whispered, "Foreclosure?" My brother lowered his phone, forgetting the live stream. I set down my glass, finally breaking the silence. "It's no mistake," I said calmly. "You can't pay without me." Every head turned toward me, shock flashing in their eyes. My father's hands shook as he glared. "You stopped paying?" he hissed. "How could you do this to us?" For once, I didn't flinch. "How could you do this to me?" But the night wasn't done. Even as they stammered, trying to control the narrative, my phone buzzed. At that very moment, the TikTok account I had created under an alias released everything. The bank statements, the group chat screenshots, the voice notes, even the email to the lawyer. The posts were timed to drop while the party was still live, while the house was still filled with relatives. My best friend sent me a single text. "It's blowing up." Within minutes, notifications flooded my phone. The truth was spreading faster than their lies ever had. The same platform that had mocked me was now my weapon. Relatives began checking their phones. Gasps turned to whispers, whispers turned to accusations. My aunt put her hand to her mouth. You used her all these years?" she demanded. My parents sputtered, trying to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable, already circulating online. Neighbors, once full of admiration, now stared with judgment. All this time, one muttered, "Pretending to be perfect while robbing your daughter." My brother cursed under his breath, realizing the live stream had captured the foreclosure notice, the panic, the collapse of their image. He fumbled with his phone, trying to end it, but it was too late. Thousands had already seen it. I should have felt triumphant, but as I looked at my father, I didn't see power or pride anymore. I saw a man trembling, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the paper. My mother's eyes darted around, wild with panic. For the first time, they seemed small, fragile, human, and in that moment, the anger that had fueled me for so long softened just slightly. I didn't forgive them, but I saw the truth. Their power had never been real. It had only ever been borrowed from me. Amanda had waited years to be seen. Tonight, she was. They would never recover their spotless image. They would never erase the truth again. The weeks after Christmas were a blur of silence and fallout. The foreclosure moved swiftly, colder than I had imagined. By mid-January, the house that had once been the shrine of my sacrifice was stripped bare, its windows dark. My parents were forced to pack up decades of belongings into cardboard boxes and move into a cramped, low-rent apartment across town. They tried to keep it quiet, but the neighbors all knew. Whispers followed them at the grocery store, at church. The once proud family name had turned into a warning. My brother didn't escape either. The live stream, the foreclosure, the TikTok posts, all of it had turned him into a joke online. His classmates called him the golden child who couldn't pay a bill. Yoku, friends who once praised him for being the future of the family, mocked him now, chanting ATM baby whenever he appeared. For the first time in his life, he couldn't hide behind me. And me, for the first time, I felt something that had nothing to do with shame or anger. I felt free. But freedom wasn't the end of my story. One morning, I opened my inbox to find dozens of unread messages. At first, I thought it was more mockery. Instead, it was invitations. A small podcast host wrote, "Your story matters. Would you come share it?" Another journalist asked for an interview about toxic family dynamics. Even strangers wrote, "What you did gave me courage. I thought I was alone." Amanda thought her justice was complete when the house was taken, but she was about to discover justice had many forms, and one of them was being heard. I agreed to one podcast, nervous but curious. Sitting in front of the microphone, I told the story from the beginning. The late-night calls, the blind loyalty, the humiliation at Thanksgiving, and the collapse at Christmas. My voice trembled at first, but as I spoke, I felt lighter. The host nodded with empathy, asking questions that let me explain not just what happened, but how it felt. For the first time, someone wanted my truth, not their version of it. When the episode aired, my phone buzzed for hours. Thousands listened. Comments flooded in. "This is my life too. I thought I was crazy, but now I see I'm not alone. Amanda, you saved me." The twist came when one message stood out. A woman wrote, "Your story is mine. I was erased from my family's will after paying for everything. I never told anyone until now." Dozens more followed with similar confessions. People trapped, people discarded, people silenced. My inbox became a flood of pain and gratitude. I sat in my apartment late one night, scrolling through the stories, tears streaming down my face. I had set out to destroy the illusion my parents built, but what I had really done was crack open a hidden world. Behind perfect family photos and cheerful posts, thousands of others lived the same nightmare. And in that moment, I realized my goal had never truly been to ruin my parents. The foreclosure, the exposure, the shame, they were consequences, not the purpose. My purpose was freedom. Freedom for me and for anyone else who had been crushed under the weight of a family that called itself love but lived as poison. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen lighting my face, and whispered to myself, it was never about revenge. It was about release. Justice, I discovered, wasn't watching my parents lose their home. Justice was finally being able to claim my life without their shadow. Justice was no longer being silenced. Justice was standing in my own truth. and knowing others stood with me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what came next. Not survival, not endurance, but building something entirely new. The day I blocked my parents' numbers was quieter than I expected. No dramatic announcement, no shouting match, just a decision, a few clicks, and then silence. I changed my phone number, closed off every channel they used to reach me, and for the first time in my life, I drew a boundary they could not cross. It felt strange, almost unreal. For years, I had answered every call, every plea, every manipulation. Now, when the phone stayed still on my desk, I smiled. I told myself out loud, "I'm not your ATM anymore." The words echoed in the empty room like a declaration of independence. For so long, I had lived chained to their needs. Now those chains had fallen away. But freedom was not the same as trust. Even as I rebuilt my life, a question haunted me. Could I ever let anyone close again? Could I risk being used, betrayed, erased one more time? Amanda had fought for survival, but survival was not the same as living, and living meant learning to trust again. I took it slow. My days became filled with steady, honest work as a technician, the trade I had once been mocked for. Fixing pipes, repairing systems, solving problems. It grounded me. Every completed job reminded me that my worth wasn't measured by their approval, but by the skill in my hands. Customers thanked me. They respected me. For once, I was seen for what I could do, not for what I could give away. At night, I turned to TikTok, but this time on my own terms. I created a channel, faceless at first, where I told stories about toxic family patterns, financial manipulation, gaslighting. I never mentioned names, but I spoke truths. To my surprise, people listened. Comments poured in. "This is exactly my family. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." My shame transformed into connection. The same platform that had once mocked me became a place of healing, and slowly I began to open myself to more than work and stories. One evening, while repairing a water system at a small business, I met someone, kind, patient, curious about me beyond the surface. He didn't flinch when I told him I was a technician. He didn't laugh at my past. He listened. He respected my boundaries. It terrified me at first, letting someone close. But as weeks turned to months, I realized not everyone wanted to take. Some people simply wanted to stand beside you. Still, the past had a way of circling back. One morning, I received a work order for a property in foreclosure. The address made my stomach lurch. It was my parents' old house. I drove there with steady hands, my tool bag in the back seat. The once bright windows were dusty, the lawn overgrown. Inside, the air smelled different, emptier, as though the house itself had shed its pride. The realtor greeted me, explaining they needed plumbing repairs before putting it back on the market. As I crouched beneath the sink, tightening pipes I had once paid to install, I let out a laugh, soft at first, then louder, until tears stung my eyes. Life had a sense of irony I could never have scripted. The house I once saved, the house I was erased from, had become just another job. No longer my burden, no longer my prison, just a paycheck. And in that moment, I felt the circle close. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the family failure, the ATM, the erased daughter. I was the woman who had survived, rebuilt, and reclaimed her story. Standing in that empty kitchen, I whispered to myself, "Family isn't blood. Family is where respect lives, where love is real, where justice breathes." And with that, I packed up my tools, walked out the front door, and stepped into the bright winter air.